Hi everybody and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Lysha and I'm the owner of Lysha Be Creative. Today's tutorial is this cute acrylic tray that I made for my bookshelf, and I'm going to show you guys how you can decorate and create your own acrylic trays for your household, different types of decor that you can certainly use these for. And so I'm going to show you exactly how I put mine together. Everything of course will be listed and linked down in the description box below, but let's go ahead and get started. All right, so you're gonna need one of these plastic like acrylic trays. I personally got mine off of Amazon during Black Friday, so I've actually had this for a while. This is a 12 by 12 acrylic tray, clear acrylic tray. I will link the one that I purchased down in the description box down below. I think I paid like less than $20 for it. You also sometimes can find these in like Home Goods, a TJ Maxx. I've seen a couple, so you definitely can sort of look in your area. But again, you don't have to use an acrylic tray. You could use a wood tray. So there's also lots of different variations that you can use, whatever kind of fits your taste and decor style. So we're going to start by prepping this, of course, with just sanding that bottom section with a sanding block, cleaning that off, and then we're just going to base paint this. Now you certainly could tape off all the edges and take this to spray paint outside if you wish to, but I sometimes just feel like it's easier to use paint without needing to do all of that unnecessary taping off if I can just paint this inside and not have to worry about taking it outdoors to paint. So we're going to add a layer of acrylic paint here. This is actually matte chalk paint from Folk Art. It's my favorite paint to use. You guys have seen me use this in all of my tutorials recently because I love just going to Hobby Lobby and picking up new colors that I don't have in my current collection of paint. So we're going to give this a really good coat of this paint. I probably should have gone and done a second coat just so that it was all like streak free, but because I'm going to be using white glitter, I didn't really feel like it was super necessary for this tray because we're going to be covering this in glitter. So a lot of that is not going to show, but that white of course is going to help kind of make those glitter sparkle a little bit more. So we're going to be using our colors today are all from Batty Glitter. So I'm going to be using Moon Dust. I'm going to be using Glock, Valaris, and a fourth color, which is literally falling right out of my brain right now and I can't remember it, but I'll remind you as soon as I kind of get up to that. So we're going to start by mixing up 150 mLs of Flint Sisters Artist Cure Epoxy. Now, this is not an epoxy that's recommended for a deep pour. However, because I'm not planning on pouring over, 1/8 of an inch at a time, I'm able to use the Artist Cure to do my layers of epoxy. So Flint Sisters Epoxy, of course, is a coating epoxy, so it's not meant for things like deep pours. So if you're looking to kind of do a tray all in one shot, meaning just like decorate it and then go ahead and lay a really thick layer of epoxy, you're going to want to grab a deep pour epoxy. But if you're going to be working in layers much like I am, then you certainly can use the Artist Cure epoxy, just using that in, smaller layers with a depth that is no deeper than 1/8 of an inch. So we're going to add some Moon Dust to our epoxy here, and we're really going to get that mixed up before we pour this directly into the bottom of our tray. I like to, after I've poured that epoxy in there, I like to just use the tray and gravity to be able to get all of that epoxy and glitter to migrate to the different sections and corners. I'm not making it go all the way to those edges because I'll actually use a silicone brush to kind of brush that epoxy into those corners. But I like kind of just letting gravity do its thing before I kind of go in, and of course we'll start to pull and push that epoxy into those cornered areas. Now you could use your gloved hand if you feel a little bit more comfortable. I have done one other tray in my Facebook group, and what I noticed when I used my hand versus using a tool is that sometimes you get the epoxy kind of along the edges of the side walls, and if you're not going to be taping it off, it can really leave kind of a messy look, and it's kind of a pain in the butt to try and have to scrape that off without damaging or scratching that clear acrylic. So I found that it was just easier and smarter, in my opinion, to use this silicone tool to be able to just pull that epoxy to the corners and to the different areas of the sidewalls that weren't covered in epoxy. So once I have gotten that all, pulled to all the different corners and sides. We'll torch this and we'll let this sit, of course. Now though, I decided I wanted to add a little bit more glitter to this. I really was kind of toying with kind of what colors I wanted to pull into this, and I just decided to go with white because a lot of my decals are dark, but it doesn't hurt to add a little extra glitter. So we're going in with Glock, and so I'm just going to add a sprinkle of Glock into this, and then we'll go in with Valaris. Valaris has a really beautiful star sort of mix, and it's super pretty, so I wanted to add some of those stars into the background of this. And so we're literally laying this on right on top of this uncured epoxy so that it sticks onto the top layer and won't sink down. So I'm going to apply a little bit of Valaris, and then we're going to go in with our final color, which is Harper. So Harper has a really beautiful shift, and I was toying with either doing Moondust or Harper for sort of that bottom layer, but we're going to let sort of Harper be that high flash color on top just to bring out a lot more of that sparkler onto that top layer of this glittered surface. So once I'm satisfied, this is just going to sit until cured. I'm going to leave it overnight, let that cure and harden before we get into adding our decals and such. So now it is the next day, and I'm going to go ahead and we're just going to brush off the top, make sure there isn't any glitter that didn't stick, and we're going to go ahead and apply our decals. Now this isn't a super smooth surface, but I am within that 24-hour window, so I am going to go ahead and just apply my decals over top without sanding, mostly because I know I'm going to be adding more layers on top of this, and it's smooth enough to be able to apply my decals without me really fearing that we're going to see a lot of like the imperfections of this layer of epoxy. I don't plan to use a whole lot of decals, so I'm just trying to avoid some of those rougher areas where I apply my decals. So I'm going to go ahead and cut out these dark florals that I got off a sheet of vinyl from Lysha Creations. Of course, she no longer sells vinyl and glitter, but I will link some clip art from Creative Fabrica down below for you to look at and maybe utilize as your dark florals if you're looking to recreate this as is. So once I've kind of chosen the florals that I love, I'm going to go ahead and just apply these. So these are literally just like vinyl stickers. So you just cut them out and then you just apply them directly to your background. They have that clear outer surrounding backing, so you don't have to worry about it really being seen under epoxy, and it has a white backing under the actual color of the flower, so it's really going to stand out on dark bases. So I could have done a dark base, of course, but because some of my other UV DTF decals are black, I didn't want to go too dark and really kind of lose the wording and being able to see what the decals say, which is why I chose to go with a lighter base for this particular tray that I'm doing. So once I get all of my florals arranged and I'm satisfied, I'm going to go ahead and just now place the UV DTF that I'm going to be using. So these 3 UV DTF decals are from Batty Glitter, Myra Makes It. And so I am just going to apply sort of these bookish decals, or ones that give me like bookish vibes, to my tray here. So I like to kind of cut these out a little bit just to really see how they're going to fit nicely into the different areas that I'm trying to place them in, just to make sure that my vision and how I see this coming together is kind of coming to life before my eyes. So I am a complete book nerd, book lover. I love all things books. And so my favorite genre of book is dark romance, which is what sort of the theme is, if you will, for the design inspiration behind this tray. So again, I didn't want to go too dark because I didn't want to, of course, lose a lot of the elements on top of this, but I very much wanted this to represent my favorite book genre here, to really just, you know, tell the story of the kinds of books that I enjoy. So I'm going to go ahead and apply my UV DTF very simply, very easy. Again, I haven't put any other layer of epoxy, so I've done my vinyl decals. Now I'm doing my UV DTF. I'm doing this all on one layer. You certainly could, if you wanted to, do multiple layers. I really do love the look of trays that have sort of that multi-layer look. It almost gives that beautiful collage look. It's hard to kind of explain, but if you've ever seen a tray that has been you know, applied with different elements amongst the different layers, you really can see so much depth within those kinds of pieces, which I absolutely love. And so we're going to get a little bit of depth between a couple of our layers, but we're not going to get such an immense depth, keeping in mind that these trays are not super deep before they reach sort of the handle holes. So once I've applied my UV DTF decals, we're going to go ahead and just apply a little bit of Mod Podge as a sealer over the UV DTF. And this is solely just because sometimes with epoxy UV-DTF don't always mix. Just sort of that UV coating sometimes can repel epoxy. And so I want to make sure that there's no issues with this next coat of epoxy because I don't want to have to add a whole bunch of coats. So once that Mod Podge has dried as my sealer, I'm going to go ahead and prep another 150 mLs of Flynn Sisters Artist Cure, and we're going to add a little bit of Diamond Magic. You also could use just a really fine white glitter here. It does not have to be sort of a super fine, mica powder style. You could use a really fine white, like a 0.08 glitter that you have in your collection to give just a little bit of sparkle to sort of this top layer here. So same process here as we did with our first layer here, but at this point we're really going to be able to get a smooth finish on this layer. So I'm going to pour that 150 mLs all over the top of my decals, and we're going to go ahead and literally repeat the process that we did with the glittered layer here. So with this layer, because it's much clearer, we're not really going to have as much of a hard time, I would say, spreading that out because the epoxy is not as thick as it is when you have glitter added to your epoxy, but we're going to treat this just the same. So we're going to let gravity do its thing and kind of tilt the tray in different directions to allow that epoxy to pool to the directions we need it to, and then go in with that silicone brush or silicone tool to push that up against those edges and in those corners to make sure that the layer of epoxy that we've added is fully covering the entire surface of this tray. So take your time with this. Don't rush the process. This part right here probably took me a good 10 to 15 minutes just to get all the epoxy kind of spread out to those sections. Then of course we'll torch this, make sure we are bubble free before we let this sit for another 12 to 24 hours before we end up touching it again. So for the final layer of this, I decided that I wanted to add some of my favorite bookish quotes. Shout out to Ebony, who came up with and sent me a couple quotes that were just super cute from books that we both love. And so all I did was I did these in Procreate. I grabbed a couple of fonts that I love and toyed with the different fonts, and I just typed these out and then pulled that canvas into Cricut Design Space and cut this on vinyl. So you could do the same thing in Cricut. I just prefer to use Procreate because I have a lot of my favorite fonts in Procreate versus Cricut. So that's just why I chose to do all of my design work in Cricut, very simply typing these out versus Cricut Design Space. But then of course I pulled that into Cricut and I cut this on what is my favorite color, like a lavender purple, because that color best I feel like represents me. So I'm a purple gal, so I decided that I wanted a little bit of me, of course, in this tray, and so that was why I decided to go with the purple. But of course you can go with whatever color you like or whatever the aesthetic is of your tray. So we're just going to apply these really simply. There's really no rhyme or reason, but this was just one of those kind of fun projects that, number one, it was personally for me, and you know, as I look back at this tray, there are 1,000 different ways that I could have designed this, but I love just being able to create different pieces that I can use functionally in my household. So this is going to be a tray that sits on my bookshelf and holds the books that I will be reading throughout the month. And it'll also just function as a cute decor piece too when I don't have books I'm currently reading in that and on top of that bookcase. So again, just a functional piece of art. It doesn't always have to be tumblers that we use to create beautiful creations. Think about the different things that you could use to maybe transform your home, maybe just, you know, create some art pieces that you can hang on your wall, or trays like this where you can use in different aspects of your household. Doesn't always have to be something that we're drinking out of or using, you know, as a cup in that sort of function. So once I get all of my decals applied here, that's kind of all I'm going to do. I'm not going to do any other elements. There are 1,000 things that I totally could have added, but I'm glad that I stuck with sort of just this simple look. Will I be back to creating more trays? 1,000% probably yes. Maybe not necessarily a bookish tray, but I do have an idea for one more bookish themed tray. I really want to grab some books that I love and do like a burned book pages. Oh, I have this really great idea. I don't know if I'll do it in the near future, but that is another idea that I kind of had as I was creating this one. So We're gonna go ahead and add our very final coat to this, and I'm gonna speed this up a little bit because you've already seen me do this twice, but same process here. We're doing another 150 mLs of that epoxy, Artist Cure, and we're just going to do this process the exact same way. So letting gravity do its work, and then of course going back in with that silicone tool to just clean everything up. Make sure all of our corners are covered in epoxy and that we have a nice smooth finish before we go ahead and torch this to let it sit for its very final coat. So I only needed one final coat because we had really good first 2 coats of epoxy, so I didn't need to do a second final coat, but I am absolutely in love with how this tray came out. I cannot wait to be using this, of course, and I know it's something that I'm going to like look at and stare at every day now that it's on my bookshelf, but I hope that you guys enjoyed today's video. If you did, give this video a huge thumbs up and subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you guys again in the next one. Bye!